introduce Sam. I've known Sam for a long time. Years ago, he was working at, I think he sort of started at BRIT, and my wife, and she kept talking about Sam. So she was saying, well, Sam's single and he needs to find a wife. So I think everybody there was looking for Sam's wife. I
Wait,
think that,
Sharon? Sharon said that to you, Dick?
yeah, she said he needs to get a wife. Anyway, so Sam, you also worked for Mansfield. The Oliver Park. You were starting that up. That was one of your first jobs, and you've done presentations all the time. And Sam is very good with presentations, especially with young kids. If you want to get the skills of speaking to young kids on hikes and stuff, follow Sam around for a while. I think you did the Tandy Hills a lot.
Mhm.
So anyway, Sam's sort of moved on and up and on and up and on and up. And we're very pleased to have him tonight to present on soil health. This is a good topic because we don't know that much about it. We know things above the soil, but not below the soil. So Sam, take it away.
Awesome. Dick, thank you so much. And yeah, I did. I liked your wife. Your wife was a great friend of mine. And yeah, I did meet her when I worked there at BRIT, the Botanical Research Institute of Texas. If you're not familiar with BRIT, what a cool place. If you haven't gone to BRIT, you need to go to BRIT. And specifically, you need to go into the herbarium. See if you can get permission to go into the herbarium, looking through the plant specimens. My goodness, it is just so much fun to look at plant specimens from around the world and throughout time. And if you don't know, I don't know if you know it or not, but apparently soil is important for plants. I've read this somewhere that plants need soil. I've read that plants require soil. And what we're going to do tonight, we're going to talk about soil health. We're not going to go too much into the chemistry of soil or the geology of soil. We're going to talk about the living aspects of soil. And before I start with that, I do need to start with some caveats. And also, I hope that everybody can hear my voice okay. If you can hear my voice and if you have access to chat, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you the last time that you had soil or dirt under your fingernails. Okay, that's the question that I'm going to ask you. When was the last time that you had dirt under your fingernails, and how long did it take you to get it out? Okay, those are my first questions, just to test to see who has access to chat and who can hear my voice. So I see a few people that said today, this morning. Oh, that's great. That's wonderful.
Soil.
So what we're going to do now, I'm going to give you a few caveats to myself. I'm not a soil scientist. I have taken some soil classes before in college, but I am not a soil scientist. I'm just not very knowledgeable about the characteristics of soil. I can appreciate it, no doubt. I'm sure you can appreciate it too, but I can't go deep into the different characteristics of soil. I'm going to touch and kind of scratch the surface of some of that tonight, but I'm not a soil scientist. I'm also not a plant physiologist. You know, if you were to ask me, Sam, my plant is getting a little bit yellow, my rose is getting a little bit yellow on the leaves, what should I do? I'll say, I don't know, chop it down. I don't know much about plant diseases. I'm not a plant physiologist. I'm also not even someone that can test your soil. I don't even know how to test
Wow, no.
soil. Oops. I don't even know how to test soil. And I am kind of curious in chat if you'll tell me if you've ever had your soil tested before. Has anyone ever tested their soil before? Have you ever sent out a soil specimen? You can do these sometimes with the AgriLife Extension offices in various counties. The ag agents or the soil agents, they have the capacity to do this. They have the equipment to do these sort of things. I do not. I do not. I don't know how to test your soil. What I am is a wildlife biologist. I'm very lucky in life to be a wildlife biologist, and I study the living aspects of, in our area, the urban ecosystem. So we're going to talk about the living aspects of soil tonight. Before we do that, I went kind of down the rabbit hole of our historical relationship with soil. And it is a relationship that we have had with soil for millennia. As long as we were able to harvest, or as long as really we were able to gather, we have had a relationship with soil. And I don't know if anybody here has seen The Dust Bowl before, the Ken Burns film. Actually, I think it's a series called The Dust Bowl. If you haven't seen it, I would almost argue that it is essential viewing. Not only is it super interesting, from a historical standpoint, it also gives us some precedents to a bad relationship that we had with soil. If you're not familiar, in the 1930s, give or take, the central part of the United States that was being heavily, heavily used by agriculture went through some drought, and there was some tremendous issues with the soil. And erosion occurred, and there was an increased pressure on the soil too, some different techniques that people were using basically to corrupt all of the topsoil, to use all of that topsoil up and not replenish it. It wasn't a sustainable form of agriculture. It caused a pretty horrific example. The Dust Bowl, again, if you haven't seen it, I highly, highly encourage you to look up The Dust Bowl with Ken Burns, a fantastic series. But we've had this relationship with soil, and in some cases, it's been detrimental to us. A little terminology change that we want to start here too. Soil versus dirt. And one of my professors said dirt is what you dust off. Dirt is what you dust off, or dirt is kind of what's underneath your fingernails. Soil, soil is or should be alive. It should be full of life. So when we talk about healthy soils, we are talking about living soils as opposed to
Is it on
dirt, which
Netflix?
is just a void of life. So dirt, void of life, soil should be full of life. Not going to go too much into the different strata here, but just so that we have some background of the terminology. When we look at the soil horizon, we can see the different layers in this. And the soil part of it, at least the living part, that's predominantly the topsoil, the organic layer. There may be a touch of life that gets into the subsoil, but really most of the life is maintained, is sustained at the top levels, that organic layer and the topsoil. Those are the areas that we really want to shoot for the good health. However, the bottom layers, the layers below that, the geologic foundation, that can dictate what kind of plants may or may not be growing there. The parent material, that bedrock, this is where we get more into the geology of the soil structure. But at the top part, that's where our life is sustained and found. Now let's look at aggregates. Again, going through just a little bit of the terminology. Aggregates are little particles. They're basically particles within the soil, within that area that may have different parent material. They may have different chemical composition. It can be composed of roots, of fungi, of mycelium, bacteria, tons of microbes. These can form the aggregates of the soil. And then we have our cycles. With the water cycle, early on, we were talking about the joy of the rain that we got. Oh my gosh, fantastic that we got a touch of rain last week. You know, it'd been a while since we'd had a good bit of rain. Definitely not enough rain to percolate, to fill up that water table. But it is a lovely experience when we get some of that rain. Hopefully, we'll start to see a little bit more rain as we shift from summer into quote unquote fall or winter. We should see more of this precipitation, but there is a cycle to water. So, water is cyclic in the ecosystem. Someone told me once, and I love the question, they thought, well, is there such a thing as wasted water? So, if water is genuinely a cycle, is it possible to waste water? Can it just pop up somewhere else? And I said, well, what happens is, and I had to do research on it as well, is sometimes when we place water one place, it will be grabbed through evaporation, through condensation, transpiration, and it takes it to an area that may not need as much rain as an area that does. So it may be true that there's no such thing as wasted water, but that water may end up in an area that does not need it. Or that area may be go through a drought because of the water being cycled around into different spots on the planet. And then there's also the nutrient cycle. And these are all parts of healthy soil. The water cycle, the nutrient cycle. The nutrient cycle is a natural process that moves those nutrients from things maybe that were living through their bodies, perhaps, or actually by their bodies. It's that decomposition, that movement of nutrients in the ecosystem. It's a cyclic pattern, and soil is a foundational level of that nutrient cycle. Why don't we talk turds? Why don't we talk about turds? The joys of turds. And in chat, real quick, if I could ask, does anyone know? Actually, yeah. Do you know the two animals of turds that I am showing right here? Do you know what kind of turds either one of these? They're different critters. They're both animals. Do you know what either one of these turds, what the animal belongs to, or the ones that made those turds? Anybody have a guess on that? I won't make fun. If you have access to the chat, maybe throw it in there. Ooh, Marla and Ann. Wonderful. Way to go. Have you seen this presentation before? You may have, or it's just like we practiced earlier on, Marla, Ann, and Elise. So, yes, we have a coyote turd over there on the other side. Those are persimmon seeds. Man, do they love persimmons. And then we have earthworm turds on the other side. And it's kind of funny, some stores actually sell earthworm turds. I mean, I guess you can sell anything to anyone. But earthworm turds, those are essentially cycled nutrients from different layers in the soil that bring it up towards the topsoil or the surface, the organic layer of it. Turds are vitally important for healthy ecosystems, for a healthy soil structure. It also cycles those nutrients around. They went through that organism's body of various spots in the ecosystem and put them in that one spot to feed the soil. Death is vitally important. And I'll say that again for emphasis. Death is vitally important. Death is so crucially important for the ecosystem. It is how the nutrients cycle around. The process of dying, that stinks. That sucks. That's horrible to see. Seeing something die is not fun. Seeing pain is not fun. But death itself is so important in the ecosystem for cycling all of those nutrients. My wife, Dick mentioned earlier that Sharon was mentioning that I need a wife. That's very sweet of Sharon to say such a thing. Well, I found my wife at BRIT, actually. She was a volunteer at the Botanical Research Institute of Texas. My wife, Elizabeth, she's got an interesting job. She is a crime scene investigator, a CSI. And she actually works for the city of Arlington. And I know you may think, oh, wow, that's a pretty cool job. Well, I'm sure there are some cool aspects to it, but there's also a lot of death. And every once in a while, she'll see something that they call a decomp. And a decomp is where they find a body after a while, find an individual after a while, and typically, that individual is pretty smelly because the bacteria have started to break down the nutrients. All of those microbes wait for that immune system to stop before cycling all of those nutrients around. Death is vitally important, and the soil is made up of a lot of life, but it comes from a lot of death. It's also why compost works. One of the reasons compost works is that we supplement that soil with nutrients and even with death, little dead ovaries of plants that we call old fruit. In chat, how many of you have a compost pit? Do any of you have a compost pit? My dad has got a great big old compost pit. He lives out west in Hudson Oaks, which is kind of close to Weatherford, just west of Aledo. And he's got a big compost pile, and they throw kind of everything in there. And I remember flipping it around, helping him flip it around, and how hot it would be. It would be hot, hot, hot in there because that compost is full of metabolic reactions, of those chemical reactions of the breaking down of the nutrients to be utilized by microbes, by various organisms, but also to cycle everything in the ecosystem. And great to see that so many folks have compost pits. It's a great thing. Brag about your compost. Have neighbors come over and say, "Hey, do you want to smell my compost?" That's how you know you're with a group of friends. It's also why I like to leave the leaves. Leave the leaves. Leave the leaves. Leave the leaves. It's okay to leave some leaves. The leaves aren't going to kill us. They're not going to hunt after our children or anything like that. The leaves can persist in the ecosystem. And deciduous trees, that's one of the reasons that they drop their leaves. They drop their leaves to create that little top layer of a compost pit to trap the carbon, to cycle that carbon around from the leaves. That's why they lose their leaves. So it is a good thing to leave some leaves. Now, I like to leave a lot of leaves, but not all the leaves. If you're dying to rake some leaves, to bag up some leaves, to add them to your compost, that's great. But I also maintain some areas of my own habitat that have little leaf piles. I will leave leaves in various parts of my own landscaping for some of the critters that I'll be talking about in a second, but also for the compost pit that they at least blanket. Fungi are crazy interesting. I wish I knew more about fungi. That is one group that I want to learn a lot more about. And fungi are a crucial foundational part of the soil structure, a foundational point of the life of soil. And fungi is also a network of these mycelium or these hyphae that create a mycelium, like a network that these exist in our ecosystem. It can be super, super pretty, and there's a lot of great information about fungi. So much information about them, how even some plants utilize fungi to share various messages through chemical communication. Bonkers cool. I mean, bonkers cool. One of my favorite books, actually, is written by a chemical ecologist. Thomas Eisner is his name. He actually studied insects. My favorite book is called For Love of Insects, but he was a chemical ecologist. And he would talk about the chemical communication that exists all around us, maybe that we don't pick up as well with our sense of smell, but that there is just this communication of chemistry all around us in the ecosystem. Fungi are crucially important in this chemical communication, but also they break down so much of the soil as decomposers. Have you seen it before? How many of you have seen one of these fairy rings? Have you? In chat, if you've seen one of these before, if you have access to chat, you don't have to, or you can just nod your head. I saw Dale there nodding your head. Yeah, I've seen that before. These fairy rings exist. They're super fun to see. And Dick, can you still talk to me? Can you
Yes.
hear me? Dick, when was the last time that you kicked a fungi just for fun?
I don't necessarily kick them.
Come on, Dick. You were a little boy once. You were
Yeah,
a little boy once.
I can't remember the last time, and so
Yeah.
I've kicked them before, but not that often.
Yeah, so as a little boy, I would see these little fairy rings, and of course, I'm a little boy, so I just, that's nature's sort of, kicking point is you kick these things, or you pick them, you eat them, whatever it may be. The truth of the matter is, with these fungi, with the caps that you see, that is just the fruiting body. These things exist all around underneath the ground. So even by kicking or by picking a mushroom, I know it kind of disturbs the natural area perhaps, but that fungi is still persisting and existing in that underground mycelium. What happened in a fairy ring like this, that original spore was dropped right down in the middle, and the mycelium all spread out to form those fruiting bodies all around the periphery. It's amazingly cool. I don't endorse anybody kicking fungi, but it's also kind of fun to do. Dick, you and I need to go out and kick a fungi sometime soon. Vegetation is important, and I know I'm talking to a group that probably does a lot of vegetation. Earlier, we were talking about managing our own landscapes. We were talking about different plants that we can use. And I challenge everyone here. You already know the challenge, and you probably are doing this anyway, but I challenge you to do more. And when I say more, I mean more plants. You need more plants. You need different types of plants. So, plant diversity is so not only interesting and beautiful and fascinating, it's also crucially important for the ecosystem health. So plant diversity, it drives the ecosystem function by having different types of plants, even experimenting with different types of plants. Gary and I were talking earlier about finding some plants that are quote unquote deer resistant or that aren't quite as palatable for deer. Well, it's fun to experiment with some of these, and you may find out that deer don't eat that much of this one plant, or maybe they'll just get little bits of this other plant. Maybe they don't eat this one plant at all. Experimenting with these different types of plants, crucially important, but also makes our landscape so much more interesting to look at, too. Weeds increase biodiversity. Dare I say it? Weeds increase biodiversity. I don't know if this is anyone's lawn or what it looks like there where you may live. This is kind of what my yard looks like. To the general folk, it is just going to look like a very weedy lot. But to me, I see diversity. I see biodiversity in all of those little quote unquote weeds. And I don't even like that word. Or weed is just a common word that people will say. When I worked at BRIT, one of the volunteers told me weed is botanical racism. Weed is botanical racism. It's like saying this is good, this is bad. Well, I kind of like to think that it all just exists. And to have a lot more quote unquote weeds, to have a lot more weeds, that means you're going to have a lot more diversity. It's when we have one plant that takes over an area, then it becomes uninteresting. But if you have a lot of different plants, a lot of different quote unquote weeds, you have a lot more biodiversity, and biodiversity begets biodiversity. There is a universe underneath your feet. There is a universe that exists where maybe the rays of sun don't penetrate, where the light may not penetrate. There is a universe that exists right underneath every step that you take outside. Let's look at some of the critters that we see underneath our feet daily. Okay, the first one, let's talk about nematodes. Nematodes, sometimes people say nematode with frustration or with some anger. My dad grows tomatoes and he grows okra and all sorts of different things. And when the season is over and we're adding to our compost and we pull up some of the plants, you can see the roots that are just gnarly with all of these little quote unquote nematodes, these wormy things in there. They are itty bitty tiny microbes. They're super, super small. There are quote unquote good ones and bad ones. Bad being the ones that maybe go after our tomatoes or after our crops, but those are even pretty good in breaking down and cycling those nutrients. Some nematodes eat other nematodes. So they're part of that micro universe that exists around doing that nutrient cycling too. Worms are neat. Worms are cool. Ooh, does anybody have what's it called? A vermiculture. Does anybody have a worm pit? Ooh, can I see your worms? Dick, you've got a collection of worms and you've never told me? It's pretty cool. I mean, it's pretty fun to have this vermiculture, these worm pits. And what those worms do is essentially cycle those nutrients. They cycle those nutrients in some cases for through the different layers of the soil. Charles Darwin, a pretty well-known naturalist, called worms, or earthworms in particular, he called them the intestines of the earth, that they move things around from up to down and from down to up. They transport these things around, and even their waste are useful things to add to the soil. Here's a dare. I've got another dare for you. The next time that you see an earthworm, I want you to play with that earthworm. Will you? Will you play with that earthworm? I want you to feel that earthworm. And as you feel that earthworm, you can do it. Don't be scared to. As you feel that earthworm, you'll find out the class of those. Is it the class or the order? One of those two. It's Aligaketa. Aliga meaning few, Kita meaning bristles. They have these little tiny hooks, these little tiny bristles on their exoskeleton, on the outside, the cuticle of these worms. Next time you see a worm, I dare you, I double dare you to feel that worm. If you feel that worm, you might feel some of these little hooks. And those hooks are actually what makes that earthworm hard to pull out of the ground, like this robin is struggling to do on the other side here. But earthworms have these cool little bristles. One of the predators of earthworms, have you heard about these? Have you heard about these things? The shovelhead flatworm. You may have heard about these. They made a little bit of news a while back. They've been here for quite a while. But these are platyhelminthes. These are flatworms. They're non-native, and they actually do feed on some of our non-native earthworms too. So you can argue, oh man, how bad of a thing is that? Well, these flatworms, these shovelhead flatworms, what they do is they basically they spoon. They spoon, so romantic. They spoon an earthworm and then they secrete an enzyme. They secrete an enzyme that starts to dissolve that earthworm, and then it sucks up the dissolving juice of that earthworm. I know, great nightmare fuel for these things. So it's a pretty fascinating thing, these flatworms are. They are a non-native pest. Some people argue it's an agricultural pest. I don't know if they've tried it, if they've really reached those numbers yet. As platyhelminthes, as flatworms, they're also a critter that you don't just chop up. You don't just chop up these things. If you're familiar with the story of these flatworms, the more that you slice up, if you slice one in half, it becomes two, and both of those will predate on more earthworms. If you slice them up even more, there's going to be more and more of them. Some people will say you play with osmosis, so you put a little salt on there, and all that water actually comes out to meet with that salt. That salt. But these flatworms, they're kind of creepy, but also super, super interesting. If anybody has seen one of these shovelhead flatworms, would you write it in chat if you've seen one before? You can find them here in Arlington, here in Dallas, Fort Worth. If you flip over some logs, if you flip over some pots, they probably came through the nursery trade, but they live here amongst us and with us. Now let's look at snails and slugs. I'm a big fan of snails and slugs. They live with us. They live amongst us right here. They are decomposers. They will feed on decaying plant material. They'll also feed on living plant material too, just FYI. But they will recycle those nutrients around. Another beautiful thing while we're talking about romance, their anus is right next to their mouth. So their anus and their mouth are right next to each other. So an interesting thing, and maybe next time you see a snail or slug, be nice. Be nice. Have a little compassion for the next snail or slug that you see, because their little behind is right there by their mouth. The next group, isopods, roly-polies. Oh, and I'm asking the group a lot of stuff on chat. If you can access chat, cool. If you can't, that's okay too. How many people here, or actually, what do you call these? Do you call these pill bugs? Do you call them wood lice? Do you call them roly-polies? Anybody call them doodle bugs? They've got a whole bunch of different names for these things. In different countries, they have different names for these isopods. They're terrestrial crustaceans. So I see a couple doodle bug fans in chat right here too. I typically call them roly-polies. Yeah, it depends on what you want to call them. In England, they're actually called cheese logs, is one of the fun names for them, cheese logs. I don't know exactly why they're called that, but they are. And roly-polies, when Dick and I aren't kicking mushrooms, what we like to do is flip over logs and look for roly-polies. If you're out with a kid and you say, hey, will you help me find roly-polies? Let me be honest with you, you just made that kid's day. You made that kid's day if you say, hey, would you help me find some roly-polies out here? And the next time you do, I want you to flip over a roly-poly, look closer. Look closer. Underneath the roly-poly, you may see these white structures underneath the belly of this. Those are actually the gills. Those are the gills of this creature. I dare you. I dare you to go out, find a roly-poly, flip it over. It'll do that little roly-poly dance where it tries to right itself, but flip it over and you'll see these little white pouches. And those white pouches, they may be egg cases, but they'll also have ones that are gills. The gills of these things, they're crustaceans, but they still need moisture. Part of that rolling up that they do is defensive, but it's also for keeping moisture in there. So they will do that roll up, not just to keep themselves safe, but also to keep the moisture in their body so that they can breathe through the gills. Another way cool thing about roly-polies, as you and your son, your daughter, your grandkids, or some strangers out at a park that you just made the day when you said, help me find a roly-poly, as you're doing this, tell them about roly-polies. And roly-polies are great for pollution. They're great in the fact that they don't pollute, but they'll also grab on to some of these heavy metals, these weird uh, pollutants like lead, cadmium, arsenic. They will grab onto those and they will keep them within their body basically. So it holds on to some of these pollutants doing this remediation. Way, way cool thing. They live in healthy soils. You may see some millipedes in your house. Sometimes these guys find a way inside our houses. It's nothing to worry about. They do not hurt. They do not harm us. They're detritivores. They are decomposing stuff. Whenever I find these millipedes, I'll put them right back outside where they can break down leaf material. They probably come inside for either some nutrients or the temperature or moisture even. But millipedes, they are decomposers. They're detritivores, breaking down nutrients, cycling them in the soil. Centipedes, these are predators. Centipedes, in some cases, I don't know if it's all cases, but at least in some cases, they have these mandibles, these chelicera that have venom sacs, and they can give a wallop of a bite. But they can also be great pest control on either the left or right side, the one that has the longer legs. This is a critter called the house centipede. Maybe you've seen some inside of your house before. We have them here in Arlington and Dallas Fort Worth. They are predators of other little tiny bugs. The predation process, when they're eating those bugs, there's pooping out the remnants of those bugs, doing that nutrient cycling as well. But they are pest control. They'll be eating some of maybe the unwanted critters in and around our houses. The next group are springtails. And springtails, I've read some things that say by biomass, springtails are the most abundant organism on the planet. In other words, there's a lot of springtails out here. There are a ton of springtails. Springtails are tiny. They're itty bitty things, usually a millimeter or less. Maybe there's some big ones that might be a couple millimeters. In other words, itty bitty tiny things. But these guys move around with this structure called the furcula. They're called spring tails because the furcula, ding, it bings right off, flinging them around to jump to another spot. And you can see it in that GIF, that furcula that just bing, and they fly around with that. There's some folks that don't even put them in with insects, put them in some other arthropod groups, in isopoda. Depending on how you want to classify things, they are a big component of our soils, though. Ants. Ants are good. Ants are good for the soil. Yes, I'll say it again. Ants are good for the soil. No doubt. There are some non-native ants. There are some invasive ants that I'm not too fond of. Fire ants. I utilize chemistry in my own landscape, in my own yard. When I see a fire ant mound pop up, I'll put a little bait poison out there to try to manage the fire ants. But we also have quite a few native ants around here. The native ants aren't as defensive as fire ants are. You could even throw the word aggressive with fire ants. Not a pleasant experience to get stung and bitten by fire ants, but our native ants do a lot of good for the soil. They aerate the soil, so their holes, their tunnels actually allow oxygen to come through to add to some of the metabolic processes that are occurring in the soil. Ants are good for the soil. Have you seen these before? Crane flies. Crane flies, these are typically the early spring organism. We'll get calls about giant mosquitoes in the house. These are good for the soil. If you haven't seen the baby of a crane fly, they're these little tiny maggots, essentially. And look at that face. I mean, just look at it. Hushy-boo, shoo-boo, hushy-boo, shoo-boo, shoo-boo. They're so cute. They are magnificently cute, but they're also crazy, crazy interesting. As adults, they have vestigial mouth parts. They don't even eat as adults. They get all of their nutrients from this stage, from the larval stage. The larvae of these are decomposers. They cycle the nutrients around, they add to compost too. Crane flies, crucially important in the ecosystem. How about this little guy? Does anybody have a guess of what kind of beetle this is? What kind of beetle is this? Does anybody at all have a guess on what it might be? Let me tell you what it eats. These guys eat snails and slugs. They are predators of snails and slugs. These, I can almost promise you that you played with these as adults. I can almost promise you that when you've seen one of these before as an adult, you instantly smile when you see one. Any guesses? I'm watching chat. Any guesses of any of what this beetle may turn into? Tina? Oh, Marion, a good guess of ladybug. Not a ladybug. That's great that you smile over ladybugs. But Tina O, I hope I said that right, or Tineo, you got it. These are baby lightning bugs. These are fireflies. This is what a baby firefly looks like. The pupa or the larva of a firefly looks like a little maggot thing, and they crawl around in the leaf litter, grabbing and eating the snails and slugs. It's one of the reasons that I leave the leaves. I leave the leaves for the snails and the slugs that the fireflies, the lightning bugs, the baby fireflies, the baby lightning bugs have something to eat in there. These are all part of the soil. Also, we have toads and we have salamanders. Believe it or not, in Arlington, Texas, yes, we have some salamanders. The smallmouth salamanders, there's a few spots over at River Legacy. If you're not familiar, that's a park system in Arlington. There are some of those little ephemeral ponds where if you're flipping over stuff, you can find these smallmouth salamanders. They are nibbling on stuff. They are living in and around the soil, as are our toads. We've got a couple species of toads here in Dallas, Fort Worth. We have the woodhouse toad, the Gulf Coast toad. This is a Gulf Coast toad right here. They need healthy soil because they're eating the bugs that live in and around that soil. And it's okay if you had to cover your eyes for this slide, it's okay. Snakes live in the soil too. Absolutely, snakes live in the soil. This is a charming little snake called an earth snake, the rough earth snake. They live in the soil. They will be eating the little tiny bugs, the little itty bitty tiny things that also exist within the soil. This is another snake that we have here in Arlington, that we have in Dallas, Fort Worth. This is the Texas blind snake. Rhinodulcus is the name of this one. They're relatively small. They look a little bit like an earthworm. What they feed on is ant eggs, ant and termite eggs. So they infiltrate a nest and grab on and eat these ant eggs or termite eggs. A weird thing about these too is they have a symbiotic relationship with owls. A screech owl, which is a native bird, a relatively small bird, they will hunt out, they will find these blind snakes grab them, not to eat them, but to take them over to their nest to have basically maid service. These blind snakes will eat the mites and the ectoparasites in the nest of that screech owl. There's got to be some chemical communication that's occurring here that allows the screech owl to find these snakes, but it's a symbiotic relationship. The benefit also comes from the snake in being safe among that nest. Crazy interesting. Dick didn't mention it, but I actually studied mammals. There was a little mammal, a pocket gopher, that I studied for my graduate degree, for my thesis. They are fantastic. There are a few spots that we have pocket gophers here in Dallas, Fort Worth. You really see them a little bit more east and a little bit more north of us, and pretty far west too. I didn't study moles, but I can definitely appreciate moles. Controversial statement right here. Are you ready? Moles are good for the soil. I'll say it again. Moles are good for the soil. They aerate the soil. They mix things up. They mix the nutrients up. They're eating some of the grubs, some of the insects there. They're cycling those nutrients around, transporting those nutrients around to different layers. Moles are good for the soil health. Now, I know what you may be saying. You may say, well, darn it, I'm trying to grow a golf course in my front yard, and these moles are just ruining it. Yeah, they may ruin the aesthetic values of your yard, but they're doing a good thing for the health of your soil. Moles are good for the soil. Armadillos are good for the soil. I know, and I see some people giving me angry, what's the right word? Scorn? Frustration? Hatred? Is that what I'm sensing through some of the images? Maybe. Armadillos are great for the soil. They mix things up. They dig in the soil. They move nutrients around wherever they go. They're eating some of the bugs there, cycling those nutrients from the bugs. They're disturbing some of the roots of the plants, in some cases to the detriment of the plants, but also for the life of the soil by killing some of those plants, cycling the nutrients around. And it's a challenge that I have for all of us as we view the ecosystem, maybe view how other organisms are viewing, or how other organisms are utilizing the ecosystem. Armadillos, a lovely native, they've been here for millennia. They will be utilizing the soil and doing good things. And Mary says that she loves armadillo, loves them, and loves the armadillo disturbing the soil in her yard. Birds need healthy soil. Birds need healthy soil. By having healthy soil, well, you'll have a lot of different plants, hopefully. By having a lot of different plants, you'll have a lot of different bugs. And even for the seed eating birds or the nectar feeding birds like hummingbirds, at some point in their life, they are insectivores. They're eating bugs. So the bugs that need the plants that need the healthy soil, or the bugs that are in the soil already, they are feeding our birds. Birds need healthy soil. After I give presentations like this, in some cases I give them to garden clubs or to master gardeners or whoever it may be. And I get the question at the end, like, oh, that's cool about moles being good for the soil. Now, how do I kill them? Or that's pretty good about, earthworms being good for the soil. How do I kill them now? And I'm not good at addressing those questions. I'm really not. There are industries that exist based on getting rid of biodiversity. There are industries that the foundation of those industries is getting rid of biodiversity. I argue biodiversity is a good thing. If you want birds, you need biodiversity of weeds and maybe some unwanted plants or some unwanted bugs. You need all these things to have biodiversity or healthy soil. You need these sort of things. It also challenges our perspective, the perspective of beauty and of health. Some folks, and if I'm with a group, I typically ask a raise of hands or whatever. How many of y'all think that the photo on the left is prettier than the one on the right, or the one on the right is prettier than the one on the left? And there will be a whole spectrum of folks that have varying viewpoints on beauty. And as an urban wildlife biologist, I'm very lucky. God, I'm so lucky in life. But I'm lucky that I get to travel throughout the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And in some areas, will I name names? I'll name names. Particularly North Dallas. North Dallas is very affluent, very, very affluent. Some of those areas, super affluent. And when I look on Google Maps, I will see tons of parks. I will see parks and golf courses in these areas that make it look like it's a green mecca in those areas of North Dallas. But as a wildlife biologist, when I go out to visit some of those parks, which I get to visit a lot of them, I will see that there are no leaves left on the ground. There are no dead, decomposing logs left on the ground. Those have been swept aside. Those have been manicured away. And even as a wildlife biologist, I would say that some of those areas are not as healthy as the ones that have what looks like a lot of death, dead plants, dead limbs, all of these things. That's where I go, not to kick fungi, but to look at fungi, to flip over logs, looking for roly-polies or whatever it might be. We even have a word for this. We call this, oh my gosh, the luxury effect. It just came to me. The luxury effect, that some of those more affluent areas actually have less wildlife habitat than those that are less affluent because of the quote unquote death that's allowing life to persist in the soil. So you thought this was just going to be a fun presentation where I wouldn't give you a challenge? Well, I've got homework for you. I've got a homework challenge for you. Here's what I dare you to do. I've given you several dares. You have to find a roly-poly. You have to look for a worm and grab a worm, feel the prickles on the worm. But here's the third challenge. I challenge you to get a white plate, as white as you can get, white plate, or a little decomposable plate if you don't have a white plate, decomposable plate or some sort of plate. And I want you to take a handful of soil in some part of your landscape or in some park that you frequent. Take a little bit of that soil and I want you to sprinkle it onto the plate. Then I want you to wait. I want you to wait, and if you have a magnifying glass, that is super important. So if you have that plate with little bits of soil, take that magnifying glass and watch. Watch to see what may come out of that soil. If you don't see much, maybe go to a different part of your landscape. So do this sort of stuff. Look closer at the soil, that universe that exists right around you. If you want extra brownie points, you can upload some of these to iNaturalist. Again, some of them are going to be pretty small things, but if you take your magnifying or your little loop with the camera of your phone, you might be able to get an image of some of these. If you post some of them, throw them on iNaturalist, maybe even tag me. I'll see them, and it just makes my whole day when you do this. But there's the challenge. Look for some of these organisms that live within and amongst the soil in your own landscape. Another thing that I'd like for you to do, or you don't have to, but I'd like to invite you to one thing too. This upcoming Saturday, September 6th, we are going to be celebrating some of the organisms that live in the leaf litter. These are little moths, these are little beetles, these are the little things that exist all around us, but we're going to celebrate them at night. So after the wildscape workday at 10:30, I'll do a little presentation about moths, about why some critters are attracted to lights. And then in the evening, we're going to go out and look for some of these together. So from 8 to give or take 11 p.m., maybe later. We'll see. Should be perfect conditions for it. On Saturday evening from 8 to 11. Stay as long as you'd like. If you get your quota of bugs and want to shuffle off, that's totally okay. We'll have at least, oh boy, 11 stations. 11 stations of lights and sheets around them that will be bringing in lots of bugs to examine them. I would love, love, love if you're able to make it to this event. Again, this upcoming Saturday, a little presentation in the morning. If you'd like to come to that, okay, cool, no obligations. And then a little practice in the evening that we'll be doing there at Molly Holler, too. And with that, I would love to address any questions about soil, about the event coming up, about your homework assignment, any of that. I would love to address any of those. I saw a couple questions that did pop up in chat. I saw there's Mary that says that she loves the armadillos. The armadillos love her soil. Way to go, Mary. Way to go. Way to go. Donna, hey Donna, great to see you. Donna has a question about these green beetles that are flying around right now. Oh, they are so cool. So these are a type of May beetles. They're June bugs, basically. The genus is Cotinus of these, Cotinus nitida. They are typically males that are flying around looking for females. The females dig into the ground to lay their eggs, to lay the grubs of these, and the males fly around looking for those females. After a rain, the soil is a little bit more loose. It's a little bit more easier to dig in than when it's super dry. So after rain, we typically see a lot of these green beetles flying around. If you're able to catch one, I dare you to look at it closer. Man, are they beautiful. Green on the outside, copper underneath too. So look at those as well. Mary also said, do you need to sign up for these? Anne's given the right answer. Nah, just show on up. Come on over. I hope we have enough parking lot space. We should. We should. Okay. What was the book? Oh, yes, Spencer. What was the book mentioned by Thomas Eisner? For Love of Insects is the name of the book. It is, yes, my favorite natural history book. It is so good. It's all about exploration. It's a book about exploration. Thomas Eisner, he goes into some of the chemistry behind it, but it's a book written for laymen. So you don't have to know anything about chemistry nor bugs to appreciate this book. For Love of Insects, it is such a good book. John, hey John, good to hear from you. Is it possible to drown the soil organisms if you overwater? Yes. Yes, it is. Absolutely, it can be. And after some rainstorms, typically after one of those like gully washers that they saw that we call it, you will sometimes see worms that come up to the surface. And they come up to the surface because they're drowning. They're drowning underneath. Good aerated soil will allow water to move through, but on those heavy rain events, organisms can drown. They can drown in there. Sometimes this is to our happiness when we're drowning a fire ant bed, perhaps. Several of them will move around, but you're right. These organisms, they're not aquatic organisms, so they need oxygen to breathe, and they've got to find oxygen by coming up closer to the surface. Okay, Dick. Yeah, you're saying the Wildscape parking lot. Yes. And probably overflow parking lot will be the other parking lot, but hopefully we'll be all right. Julie. Oh my gosh, Julie. Hello. And you call them pill bugs. Aha. Fascinating. If pill bugs tape up heavy metals, will the metals go back to the soil when the pill bugs die? A great question. And I've got to be honest with you. I don't know if they do some sort of reduction of half-life of those heavy metal compounds, or if they, like some plants do, they just grab on to the heavy metals and kind of just hold them. They hold them. When they die, maybe some of those heavy metals leach out to get absorbed by other roly-polies. But I know it's better to be absorbed within a roly-poly than to have those free-flowing pollutants. So it may be a thing that they just grab onto it, or there may be some chemical reaction that occurs that reduces their half-life or something like that. That's a great question, Julie. I'm gonna have to look. Thanks a lot. You just kept me up tonight in finding out that answer.
Tim, I
Um,
had something happen today that I'm going to ask you. I
go
found
for it.
a hornworm, a big, big fat one on the Datura plant.
Mhm.
Now, the guy was not moving, he wasn't eating. He didn't look like he'd been parasitized, but he was absolutely immobile, but um, almost big enough to be going into his pupa stage. Do you see that often that they reach a just very still? He wouldn't move at all.
Yeah, so a great question, Hester. And they're pretty, like they're crazy pretty. They're
Oh
really,
yeah,
really
big.
neat.
It's great,
Super
great.
big. And I don't know if you petted it. Did you pet it at all?
Oh
They're
yeah,
kind of,
we handled it.
oh, it's great. They're like fuzzy. They're little fuzzy wuzzy little caterpillar things too. So it could be a couple things. It could be, like you mentioned, that they're about to pupate. However, those the Sphingidae, the sphinx moths, the caterpillars, the hornworms, where they pupate is in the ground, so they don't have like an above ground chrysalis. They go to a cocoon, and that's typically in the ground or in the leaf material, so it's closer to the ground rather than up around. I bet you a nickel and a quarter. You know what I bet, Hester? I bet that that one was indeed parasitized, but the little larvae of the wasps haven't created the cocoons. So the larvae of the wasp are in the process right now of eating its body. So it's alive, but
Uh,
it is just holding on to a little bit of life before these parasitoids kill it and
I
have those
put
cocoons.
cameras on it. I'll find out, but I thought that was strange. I
Super interesting. Way to go, Hester. And Hester, do you call them roly-polies or pill bugs?
Oh, we've called them all kinds of things, but
Oh,
roly-polies was what we called them as kids.
okay. There you go, Julie. Take that, Julie. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? Mary's asking, will this video be available for replay? Dick,
Yes, it will
there it
be
is.
posted on the Arlington Conservation Council YouTube site. And
Ooh.
if you go to the first part of the chat, you'll see the link to that place. All our presentations are on our YouTube site.
Great.
If that's okay with Sam,
Absolutely. By all means.
I forgot to ask you that.
Yeah, totally cool. If you do have any questions and were scared to ask me in chat in front of everybody, you can send me an email. My standard joke, I asked the state of Texas for the longest possible email address, and there it is. So you can send me an email address. I'm super active on iNaturalist too. You probably send me a message on iNaturalist and I'll see it before I see my work email. So my username, Sam Biology on iNaturalist. You can tag me on any of your observations using the ampersand, and then Sam Biology, all one word, and I'll get to see that.
What about opossums? Are they good for your soil?
Oh, great question. So, I mean, yeah, they'll make turds. You know, anything that makes turds can be good. So possums make turds. So they're taking nutrients, cycling nutrients all around. You know, possums, I don't know if they do a ton of digging. I'm sure they're capable of digging after worms and little tiny critters. So that digging process, believe it or not, that's a great way that nutrients get cycled around to different levels of the soil. So maybe they can be good in that aspect. But they are omnivores, so they're cycling nutrients around, and yeah, they make turds too.
Do you know
There
anything
you go.
about
John and Grace. Hello, Grace, using stole John's computer. Are you killing soil organisms when you use Roundup or other herbicide? A great,
Yes.
all right, somebody said it.
Arlington Conservation Council.
Somebody said that. Okay. So yeah, when I use chemistry, and I do use chemistry in my yard, like with the fire ant poison, I try to be very, very, very selective with it. I never use a broadcast herbicide or a broadcast pesticide. That has a lot of unintentional consequences to using it. When I utilize a pesticide or an herbicide, I know, look away when I say it. But when I use some of these chemical compounds, when I use chemistry, I try to use a very targeted approach. Very, very targeted. So I will put the fire ant bait just on that fire ant mound. Do I use products like glyphosate, like Roundup? Grace, look away, look away. But I'm trying to kill all the Bermuda grass in my yard. What I do, I don't spray it. No, 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 no. I do not spray this. What I do is I take the blade of grass of the Bermuda grass and I paint it. I paint it with some of that glyphosate. And I hope, at least I hope, that the unintended consequences are reduced just by that targeted of an approach. So, Bermuda grass, it is a vile, vile plant that I'm trying really hard to get rid of. I don't want to use the spray. Instead, I just use the painting technique of it. So, I do utilize chemistry, but I try to use it so targeted, kind of like what is that, chemotherapy. I mean, kind of like such a targeted approach to just getting rid of that one organism, typically a non-native species.
Do you know anything about the soil of water plants?
The soil of, you said water plants?
Yes.
That's a good question. So in some of our plants, they can have the different forms. They can be the floating aquatics. There can be the truly submerged ones. There can be ones that have roots that go all the way to the ground. For the floating ones, that's a great question, Gary. I'm not sure that I know how they get some of those essential nutrients, those essential compounds that are in the soil of the or in the bottom of the little pond. If they have some mechanism of just absorbing some of the nutrients through the water, other ones will have the roots that go into the soil of the water, essentially. It is anaerobic soil that's at the base of the water, usually. So the organisms that exist in there are capable of living with very little oxygen. There is some oxygen that moves around in the water, hopefully, but most of the stuff is fairly anaerobic. So they're still utilizing the chemistry, the compounds, that soil aspect. But man, Gary, that's a great question. I'm gonna have to look up some more information for my own intellectual stimulation about those floating plants. Good question, Gary. I did see a couple other questions here. Paul wants to know how fracking affects the soil. Oh my gosh. A great question to Paul. Thank you, Paul, for that question. I will say with humility, I don't know. I don't know how that affects. Fracking is going past the level of the organic layers of the topsoil. I'm sure there's some disturbance that occurs, but it's going for those things that are below the substrate. So it's below those organic levels. I don't know how that affects the living part of the soil. I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does, but I don't know all of the mechanisms of that. Great question, Paul. Got to say with humility, I don't know. Ed Sola, there is a large amount of ignorance about poop, manure, and how plants avoid picking it up. Oh boy, yeah, isn't that something? And diseases, bacteria, these sort of things that also work to cycle the nutrients, to break down the nutrients. And some of these things, bacteria, are good for the plants, good for the flora and the fauna within the organism. Not always. And you know, dog poop. Can we talk about dog poop for a second? when the folks that leave out dog poop at the park and they say, hey, it's just organic, it's just organic. Well, the kibbles and bits that we use to feed our dogs, there are a lot of compounds and chemicals in there to keep the soil or to keep the food fresh, preservatives and stuff that aren't natural, at all. And it's not fun to step in dog poop either. It's particularly smelly. So I do pick up the dog poop. I don't have a dog, but you know, if I did, I would pick it up, and that's not adding very much to the soil in there. Ellen asked, what do you recommend for kudzu? Oh gosh, moving. That's what I recommend for kudzu, moving. Just move. Next question. No, I'm just kidding. So kudzu, you know, chemistry exists for kudzu as well. We have introduced some different biocontrol. We've introduced these little kudzu bugs that do eat some kudzu, but not nearly enough. Not nearly enough. Some people say you can watch kudzu grow. You can watch it grow. I don't know if it does grow that fast. It sure seems like it does. There's only a few spots in Dallas, Fort Worth that have kudzu. One of them is at Six Flags. Did you know there's an area of kudzu at Six Flags? It's staying right there. It's over there by, oh, is it the Runaway Mine Train? I think it's the Runaway Mine Train that has some kudzu right there that's being maintained in that little section. I heard the other comment of goats. Mary, yes, goats. Goats do eat pretty much anything and everything. Kind of the bummer that they will, well, also eat anything and everything, and that may be some plants that we want to keep. They're not very selective on the species. Kudzu, fortunately, knock on wood, there's only a couple populations that I know of in Dallas, Fort Worth. More on the east side are thoughts and prayers and hearts go out to them over there dealing with Cudzilla. Julie, responsible use of herbicides can be helpful for biodiversity. We use the wicking method for Johnson grass. Yeah, it's one of those things that, man, it's still a bummer that we have to use herbicides for this. I know, but it's just hard to just use elbow grease on it. So it is another tool. It is a tool that we add that we want to use responsibly, but still it's something that, you know, that we do use for it. John or Grace, do soil organisms interact with mycorrhizae for good or for bad? Great question. And I bet it's the entire ecosystem. It's the entire food web down there of the things that are eating the mycorrhiza or the fungi and the plant rhizomes, the roots. I'm sure that there are some that predate on that. I'm sure that there are other ones that even utilize the nutrients of the decomposing bugs and stuff. There is a genuine ecosystem underneath our feet. So I bet it exists for both good and for bad, being predated upon and predating other stuff. Anybody else have any other questions? Guys, thanks so much for spending some time with me this evening. Hopefully you learned a little bit. You've got some challenges to do. Find a roly-poly, flip over a roly-poly to look for those gills. Find an earthworm, feel the bristles of that earthworm. If you're able to get a white plate, put some soil on that white plate and watch it. See what sort of little tiny things, if you have a magnifying glass, that will really help. And I hope to see some of y'all at the blacklighting event this Saturday. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And there you go.
Frank,
Thank you a whole bunch.